What if I told you that the main battle for the conquest of the Wild West began not at dawn, but at sunset? For every family that decided to conquer the Great Plains or the Rocky Mountains, night was the most formidable and invisible enemy, capable of killing everyone by morning. Winters on the frontier were unpredictably fierce, and temperatures dropping to -40 degrees Fahrenheit required incredible ingenuity and endurance from the pioneers to stay alive. The pioneers quickly realized that a conventional stove would not be able to keep them warm until dawn, so they turned their attention to creating unique heating strategies that seem incredible today. Watch the video to the end to learn how a seemingly simple mistake in stacking firewood could have caused an entire family to freeze to death before dawn. What if I showed you a time machine that would take you back to a time when a bed was not just a place to sleep, but part of a heating system? The pioneers of the Wild West quickly realized that it was virtually impossible to heat a huge log cabin or dugout all night long, so they focused their efforts on creating a microclimate inside the sleeping area itself. This unusual practice was called a night oven, although in reality there was no fire in it, only a well-thought-out distribution of heat. It was a multi-layered system where each element served to insulate and preserve the precious heat accumulated during the day. The use of this design was often the only way to survive particularly frosty nights on the bare and windy plains. The basis of the night oven was a massive wooden bed frame, which did not stand directly on the floor, but was sometimes raised a few centimeters. This was done to create an air gap that insulated sleepers from the cold floor, which quickly gave off heat to the ground. Wood itself was a poor conductor of cold, and its thickness played an important role in the overall thermal insulation of the structure. Inside the frame, a thick bedding of straw or dry leaves was laid, which served as a modern mattress, but with the much more important task of retaining heat. Layers of skins or heavy pieces of felt were often placed on the bottom of the bed under the straw mattress to prevent any movement of air from below. The straw for the mattress not only softened the bed, but also contained millions of tiny air pockets, which were an excellent natural insulator. It was changed often enough to avoid compaction, as dense straw lost its insulating properties and began to let in the cold. Replacing the bedding was a laborious task, but it directly affected the family's ability to survive until morning. The straw mattress itself was covered with a thick layer of homespun cloth or a woolen blanket so that the straw fibers would not prick the body during sleep and cause discomfort. On top of this layer were placed the main woolen blankets, which were usually heavy and dense, often made of coarse sheep's or even goat's wool. Sometimes paper or thin pieces of fabric were placed between the layers of blankets to serve as wind protection and an additional barrier against the cold. The more layers there were, the more reliably the heat emitted by the sleeping people was retained. There was also a unique practice of using heated stones or bricks, which became part of this sleeping area heating system. Before going to bed, several flat stones were heated in the hearth, wrapped in old cloth or thick socks, and placed in the corners of the bed or under the feet. These heaters gradually gave off heat over several hours, helping to maintain a comfortable temperature within a confined space. It was important not to overheat the stone to avoid burns and to preserve its ability to give off heat slowly rather than immediately. Before going to bed, family members took off their outer clothing, which was often damp from a day's work, to avoid moisture evaporation, which causes cooling. They went to bed in clean and dry clothes, usually underwear, and special nightcaps, which helped keep their heads warm. The feet, as the most vulnerable part of the body, were often additionally insulated with thick woolen socks, and sometimes even with specially knitted sleeping wraps. This meticulous preparation was the key to success. The distribution of people in the bed was also subject to strict rules of survival. The smallest or weakest were always placed in the center, surrounded by the bodies of adults who acted as living batteries. The combined heat generated by several people created a powerful thermal circuit inside the blankets, which was much more effective than if everyone slept separately. This collective warmth, or the principle of huddling, was known on the frontier as one of the most reliable ways to survive the cold. Sometimes, if there was only one bed in the house, the whole family would sleep in it, huddled together, pressing their sides and backs against each other. It was uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary when the temperature outside dropped to critical levels. Those who could not fit on the bed could sleep directly under it, wrapped in skins and pressed against the ground, which retained some of the heat of the house. In the harshest conditions, the sleeping area could even be temporarily fenced off with cloth or skins, creating a kind of tent inside the house for even better insulation. This thoughtful organization of the sleeping area allowed the pioneers to survive even if the fire in the stove went out completely in the middle of the night, which was not uncommon. They relied not on active heating, but on passive, maximally efficient conservation of the heat that their bodies generated on their own. These simple but vital practices were the result of centuries of experience gained in the struggle against nature. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about this collective way of sleeping for warmth, and could you sleep like this? Write about it in the comments. And while you're writing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other stories about survival in the Wild West. Are you ready to learn the main secret of how pioneers built their homes? A house on the frontier was not just walls and a roof. It was the first line of defense against the cold. And its most vulnerable part was not the logs themselves, but the gaps between them. Log cabins built in a hurry, without proper sealing, turned into sieves through which all the heat accumulated during the day escaped, condemning the family to inevitable freezing. The key process in the construction of any pioneer dwelling, whether a log house or a semi-dugout, was the so-called caulking, or caulking of the gaps. The purpose of this process was to completely eliminate drafts and uncontrolled penetration of cold air into the room. For this, the most accessible and cheapest natural materials were used, which could be found right underfoot or near the construction site. The most common material for caulking was a mixture of clay, sand, and water, to which straw, hay, or even dry leaves were often added. Straw, acting as a reinforcing filler, prevented the clay from cracking as it dried and gave it the necessary strength and elasticity. This paste-like mixture was literally rubbed into all the cracks between the logs, filling even the smallest holes. The caulking process was routine and hard work that required constant attention and repetition. Over time, the clay dried out, cracked, and sometimes fell out under the influence of wind, rain, or vibration caused by the shrinkage of the logs. Therefore, once a year, usually before the onset of autumn cold weather, the whole family would re-caulk the house, inspecting and filling every new crack. Negligence in this matter was punished by severe cold. Not only did the walls require thorough sealing, but also the roof and the junction between the floor and the foundation. If the house stood on stilts or stones, the space under the floor was insulated by filling it with earth or tightly plugging it with straw. This prevented the rise of icy air from below, which was particularly insidious and imperceptible. In addition to clay, moss, tow, or any fibrous plant materials were used for sealing, which were packed into the cracks with a special wooden chisel. Moss was especially valuable because it has natural antiseptic properties and tolerates moisture better, not rotting as quickly as hay. It was collected in forests and harvested in huge quantities during the summer. Windows were another critical point of heat loss, as glass frames were rare and luxurious. In most early settlements, windows were covered with oiled paper, canvas, or even thin skins, which let in a little light but did not protect well against the cold. To improve insulation, pioneers often hung thick wool blankets or pieces of carpet over the windows at night, completely blocking out the light but retaining the heat. The door was also a problem. A thick but poorly fitted door could let in a lot of air, so it was often lined with skins or heavy fabrics on the inside. In extreme cases, bags of sand or earth were placed around the perimeter of the door at night, creating a kind of barrier. Sealing the door at night was one of the last things they did before going to bed. The pioneers understood that even a small gap the size of a finger could negate all their efforts to heat the house. Cold air penetrating through cracks created a draft that not only cooled the house, but also caused the body to cool down quickly. Therefore, sealing was a daily, almost religious practice. As a result, successful survival in winter depended not on the amount of firewood, but on the quality of the ceiling of the house. Only a completely insulated dwelling allowed the stove to work efficiently, retaining heat rather than simply heating the street. What were the biggest mistakes the pioneers made when it came to heating? And how could this oversight cost them their lives? Watch the video to the end, and in the next chapter, you'll learn how the architecture of the house was built around living heat. Something you've never seen before. Are you ready to learn how the architecture of a house was built around living heat? In early frontier settlements, especially in semi-dugouts and primitive log cabins, living quarters were often arranged to maximize the heat generated by nearby farm buildings. This was not just a matter of proximity, but a carefully thought-out heat exchange system based on the location of the buildings in relation to each other and the windrows. Often, the house and the storage room were built under the same roof or as close to each other as possible, sharing a common wall. The shared wall, thick and well insulated, acted as a heat accumulator. The heat generated in the utility area, even if it was small, was transferred to the living area, reducing the overall load on the stove. Thus, even the minimal heat from supplies or storage processes helped to maintain the temperature in the bedroom. At the same time, it was extremely important to strictly observe hygiene and sanitary standards in order to prevent odors and microorganisms from entering the living area. The walls and partitions between the areas had to be not only warm, but also airtight to ensure cleanliness and safety. This required special care when caulking and sheathing the interior surfaces to prevent even the slightest exchange of air. The layout of the living area was also dictated by the need to conserve heat. Large open spaces were a luxury. Pioneer houses usually consisted of one or two small rooms. The smaller the volume of a room, the easier it is to heat and the longer it retains heat. Reducing the cubic volume of a house was a direct way to save firewood and energy. There were no high ceilings inside the house. A low ceiling reduced the space that needed to be heated and kept the heat closer to the floor, where people slept. Sometimes, if the ceiling was very high, it could be temporarily lowered by stretching fabric or blankets to create a heat dome at the bottom of the room. This technique allowed the heat to be concentrated where it was most needed, near the beds. Particular attention was paid to the location of the stove or hearth. It was always located in the center or closer to the common wall in order to distribute heat as efficiently as possible throughout all rooms. If the house had a stone stove, its massive body served as a powerful heat accumulator that continued to give off heat even many hours after the fire had gone out. All life was concentrated around the stove. This is where the sleeping areas, clothes dryers, and cooking area were located, allowing every precious bit of heat radiation to be used. The heat escaping through the chimney was often used to heat water or cook food by placing special shelves or tanks on the chimney. Not a single degree of heat was to be wasted. The construction of semi-dugouts was one of the most ingenious solutions. In such a house, 3 or 4 walls went into the ground. The earth served as an incredibly effective, free and wear-free insulator that protected against wind and sudden temperature changes. The earthen embankment was the most reliable protection against frost and piercing winds. The dugout ensured stable temperatures. In winter, the earth prevented the temperature in the house from falling below a certain level, and in summer, on the contrary, it kept it cool. It was the ideal dwelling for the first, coldest, and hardest years in a new place, until the pioneers could afford to build a more substantial house. Thus, pioneer architecture was the science of heat conservation. Every line, every choice of material, and every arrangement of elements was designed to minimize heat loss and make the living space as energy efficient as possible. It was survival translated into a construction blueprint. If you are interested in such a detailed approach to the history of survival, be sure to like this video so that other Wild West history buffs can see it too. Are you ready for the shocking truth that nighttime fire management in a stove or hearth was perhaps the most difficult and responsible art of the pioneers? A mistake here not only led to the house cooling down, but could also be fatal if the cold penetrated to the bone. The art was to stack the wood so that it burned minimally but steadily until morning, which required mathematical precision and experience. One of the most common and critical mistakes was choosing the wrong fuel, which had to burn long and slowly. The pioneers tried to use the densest wood possible, such as oak or maple, which smoldered slowly, giving off heat for many hours. The use of soft woods, such as pine, led to rapid burning, and after 2 or 3 hours, the house was left without heating. Before going to bed, the pioneer would put special night logs in the stove, the thickest, well-dried pieces of wood, often with the knots cut off to prevent rapid burning. These logs were stacked tightly with minimal gaps for air access, which ensured slow, agonizing smoldering rather than burning. The idea was that by morning, there would be smoldering ashes and coals left that could be easily fanned into a fire. Controlling the air supply was critically important. During the day, the stove damper was kept open to ensure a good flame and rapid heating, but at night, the damper was almost completely closed, leaving only a tiny gap sufficient to keep the fire alive. An excess of air led to rapid burning, and a lack of air led to complete extinction, which was tantamount to disaster. Many families preferred to use clay or stone stoves, which were real heat accumulators. Their massive walls heated up during the day, and slowly, hour after hour, released the accumulated heat into the room at night. A simple cast iron stove, although it heated up faster, cooled down just as quickly, so it had to be constantly stoked or monitored. The problem was that such slow smoldering, especially when using damp or improperly dried wood, could lead to the formation of soot. Soot settled on the walls of the chimney, and if it was not cleaned out in time, it could ignite, causing a fire. Thus, the pioneer balanced between the desire to keep warm and the risk of burning his house to the ground. In order not to get up at night, the pioneers developed a complex system of laying coals. The bottom layer of coals was covered with ash, then several thick logs were laid, and a small layer of ash was placed on top again. This multi-layered structure allowed the fire to wake up gradually, providing a minimum amount of heat until morning. It was important that the heat did not weaken before dawn. If the fire did go out, it was a disaster. Rekindling it in the dark, in a frosty room and with a sleepy head, was extremely difficult and dangerous. Losing the fire meant that the temperature in the house would very quickly equalize with the outside temperature, and it was necessary to act immediately. The smoldering coals were not only a source of heat, but also a symbol of hope. If at least some coals remained by morning, it meant that the day could begin with hot food and quick heating of the room. The loss of coals meant that it was necessary to strike a spark again, which was a long, difficult process requiring great skill. The use of large, powerful stoves that could operate for up to 10 hours on a single load was considered the highest achievement. A family that had such a stove had a huge advantage in the fight against the cold, as they could sleep without worrying about having to keep watch at night. A properly laid stove gave the family priceless hours of uninterrupted sleep. How did the pioneers cope with the night cold if the stove had already cooled down? In the coldest regions of the Wild West, such as Montana or Dakota, where frosts lasted for weeks, even a good stove could not completely guarantee warmth at night. Therefore, the second line of defense against the cold began right in bed. Pioneer bedding was a complex construction where each layer performed a critically important insulating function, and the materials were taken directly from the surrounding nature, making them accessible and effective. The basis of the Pioneer mattress was a canvas bag, which was stuffed with a variety of materials. Depending on the region, these could be straw, dry corn stalks, leaves, or even sedge. Wheat straw was the most popular as it was available in large quantities and retained its shape well, providing airiness. A thick layer of straw created the perfect thermal cushion. A straw mattress had one important advantage. It not only insulated from below, but also absorbed moisture. The human body secretes sweat and vapor at night, and if this moisture remains in the bed, it quickly cools the body. Straw absorbed moisture, and during the day it could be dried in the sun, which was impossible to do with fabric mattresses. Regular drying of the mattress was an essential part of hygiene. A thin quilted duvet filled with downer wool was often placed on top of the straw mattress. This layer was intended for comfort and additional insulation from the rough straw, but its main purpose was to create another air layer. The close fit of the body to the soft layer prevented cold air from penetrating from below and improved heat retention. Blankets were the most valuable possessions. They were rarely purchased. Most were homemade, made from sheep's wool or scraps of fabric. Wool blankets not only provided warmth, but also, like straw, allowed the skin to breathe, wicking away moisture and retaining dry heat. Several light wool blankets were more effective than one heavy cotton one. On the coldest nights, animal skins were used. Bison or deer skins, carefully tanned and with the fur intact, were placed on top of all the blankets. The fur facing the body created an almost impenetrable barrier to the cold and wind that could penetrate through cracks. The skin was the most reliable but also the most expensive type of insulation, which was passed down from generation to generation. The bed was often placed in the warmest corner of the house, usually closer to the stove or to an interior wall that was not in contact with the outside air. Sometimes at night, all the beds were moved close to the stove to make the most of the residual heat. The whole family slept in one corner, while the rest of the house cooled down, turning into a kind of vestibule. An important part of keeping warm at night was a nightcap or hat. The body loses a tremendous amount of heat through the head, especially if the hair is wet or sweaty. A nightcap, often made of wool or felt, was an essential sleeping accessory that helped maintain internal body temperature and prevent rapid cooling. Pillows were also stuffed with straw, but sometimes they were made of softer materials, such as bird feathers. At the same time, the pillow was often used not only for the head, but also for additional warmth for the back or legs, to prevent any contact between the body and the cold wall or floor. Using a pillow for additional insulation was common practice. Thus, the pioneer bed was a multi-layered system of thermal insulation. It was the result of centuries of folk wisdom aimed at ensuring that the body expended the minimum amount of energy to maintain its temperature. These sleeping systems were the only way to survive when the stove had cooled down, which made them vitally important. What if I told you that the main reason people froze to death was not the cold, but the mistakes they made while trying to keep warm? Pioneers new to the frontier often made critical mistakes that were the result of ignorance of local conditions and a desperate desire to stay warm. These well-intentioned mistakes often had the most tragic consequences, which were not talked about. One of the most common mistakes was completely and excessively sealing the house. In an effort to seal every crack and prevent drafts, inexperienced settlers completely blocked the flow of fresh air. This created a problem of insufficient ventilation, especially when the stove or fireplace was in use, leading to a very dangerous situation. When fuel burned incompletely, especially when smoldering slowly in a closed stove, carbon monoxide was released and had no way to escape. A small stove operating in a closed room could slowly poison an entire family overnight while they slept. Pioneers woke up with headaches, weakness, or did not wake up at all, which was a silent and terrible tragedy. The second fatal mistake was related to hot objects. Not only stones were used, but also buckets of hot ashes, or even homemade primitive metal hot water bottles. These objects could be too hot, causing burns, or could ignite the dry straw in the mattress. Burns while sleeping were extremely dangerous and often led to infection. Sometimes in desperation, pioneers brought homemade charcoal braziers into the house in an attempt to create a portable source of heat. These braziers, smoldering without ventilation, were especially dangerous because they released carbon monoxide directly into the living area. It was one of the quickest and quietest killings on the frontier, often mistaken for death from cold. Another mistake was the improper use of mattresses. If the straw in the mattress was damp or matted, it became a bridge for the cold rather than an insulator. The cold penetrated the mattress, drawing heat from the body with double the force, and the moisture became wet, leading to rapid cooling. It was much easier to freeze on a wet mattress. Some beginners trying to save firewood went to bed in the same clothes they had worked in during the day, hoping that they would retain heat. However, these clothes were often damp from sweat and moisture, and the moisture evaporated during the night, immediately cooling the body. Sleeping in damp clothes was one of the quickest ways to get hypothermia. Excessive covering of the head and face with blankets also created a problem. Not only did it interfere with normal breathing, but it also led to moisture accumulation under the blanket.
Let's hope the storm breaks
Breathing
by
releases a large amount of vapor, which moistened all bedding and reduced its insulating properties. This negated all efforts to keep warm. An improperly secured or leaky chimney could cause smoke and gases from the stove to flow back into the house instead of escaping outside. This was not only dangerous because of carbon monoxide, but also caused soot and smoke to settle on everything, which also had a negative impact on health and cleanliness. Even a seemingly minor detail, such as a forgotten crack in the floor near the hearth, could have disastrous consequences. All the heat could escape through this crack, and a seemingly well-heated house could cool down to a critical temperature in just a few hours. These minor flaws often prove decisive in the struggle against the elements. Understanding and avoiding these critical mistakes was part of the harsh school of survival on the frontier. Only those who learned to respect both fire and cold could live to see spring. But what if it's -40 outside and you've run out of firewood? In the next chapter, you'll learn what emergency measures the pioneers used to create heat from nothing. In the Wild West, when blizzards struck suddenly, pioneers often did not have time to build permanent dwellings. In such cases, survival depended on speed and the ability to use the landscape to create temporary shelters. These emergency measures allowed them to wait out the most severe frosts when a normal house had not yet been built, and often saved the lives of entire families. The fastest and most reliable option was a dugout, or dugout. To create it, they chose a hillside or ravine. The pioneers dug a depression, using the earth as a natural wall and insulator. Thus, 3 walls in the floor were made of earth, which immediately provided a stable temperature and protection from the wind. A roof was built over the dugout, often from logs, which were covered with turf and a thick layer of earth. The earthen roof was heavy, but it provided excellent insulation and fire resistance, as well as protection from strong winds. Such a shelter, for all its simplicity, was incredibly effective against severe frost. In the steppe plain where there were no hills, pioneers dug dugouts directly into the ground, lowering the living space below the freezing level. In this case, the earth protected not only from the wind, but also from the cold itself, stabilizing the temperature inside. The entrance to such a dugout was narrow and often covered with several layers of skins to prevent heat loss. Another option for temporary shelter, especially in snowstorm conditions, was to build a snow shelter. Despite its apparent paradoxicality, snow is an excellent insulator because it contains a lot of air. Pioneers dug caves in large snowdrifts or built igloo-like structures out of dense snow blocks, which was possible in dry climates. It was important to remember that the shelter had to be small so that the heat emitted by the bodies could quickly warm it up. A large snow shelter required too much energy to heat. A small space warmed up to above zero, creating a microclimate comfortable for survival. The walls of the snow house prevented convection. Inside the snow shelter, they always made a raised platform for sleeping. The floor had to be lower than the sleeping area so that cold air would sink down and warm air would remain around the sleepers. This simple rule of heat geometry was critical and helped to prevent freezing despite the surrounding cold. In extreme cases, the pioneers could use a wagon, turning it into a temporary shelter. They stretched tarpaulin or skins over the arches, lowering them to the ground, and carefully plugged all the gaps with hay or straw. This provided protection from the wind, but the insulation was much worse than in a dugout, and such a shelter was only suitable for a short overnight stay. One of the simplest ways to provide emergency protection was to simply burrow into a haystack or straw pile. Hay and straw, like snow, are excellent insulators. The pioneers made a small depression in the haystack and sheltered there from the wind, which allowed them to survive the harshest nights using the natural resources of the farm. These temporary shelters proved that the pioneers' main resource was not wood or stone, but knowledge of the laws of nature. The ability to quickly build a shelter from materials at hand often meant the difference between life and death. When a sudden frost caught a family on the road or in an uninhabited place. In the harsh winter on the frontier, food ceased to be just food. It became fuel that gave the body energy to fight the cold. In low temperatures, the body expended enormous amounts of calories just to maintain a normal temperature. Therefore, the pioneers' diet, especially in winter, was aimed at maximizing the consumption of fats and proteins, which was a key factor in survival. The basis of the winter diet was meat, often dried, smoked, or salted. Animal fat was the most effective source of energy, which was slowly digested and provided a long-lasting feeling of warmth. Fat was added to almost all dishes to increase their calorie content, which helped maintain metabolism. The second important element was corn and beans. Corn was used to make porridge, bread, and flatbread, which were nutritious and easy to store. Protein-rich beans helped maintain muscle mass and provided the body with a steady stream of energy. In winter, people ate a lot and often to prevent a drop in blood sugar, which could lead to weakness. Hot food and drinks before bedtime were especially valued. Thick meat soup or stew with fat and vegetables served as an internal furnace. Hot food not only warmed the stomach, but also triggered the process of thermogenesis, causing the body to produce heat more actively. It was one of the simplest and most enjoyable ways to prepare for sleep. Before going to bed, pioneers often drank warm water or herbal infusions. This not only helped to avoid dehydration, which exacerbates the feeling of cold, but also created an additional supply of fluid that the body could use for heating. Contrary to popular belief, alcohol was not used for warmth, as it only provides a short-term feeling of warmth and then increases heat loss. Food was not simply digested, it was burned for warmth. The pioneer's body was in a constant state of survival mode, and every meal was a strategic operation. A lack of calories led to rapid hypothermia, even if a person was covered with blankets, which was one of the main threats. Food supplies were stored very carefully, often in pits dug into the ground to prevent freezing. Frozen food lost its taste and was difficult to prepare. Preserving supplies was equivalent to preserving life and required a lot of work. The most effective way to preserve food was smoking and salting. Properly smoked meat and fish could be stored for months without losing quality, providing families with the necessary calories even during the longest and harshest winters. They were the main sources of fat and protein during the cold season. Thus, the pioneer diet was not a choice, but a necessity. It was the most calorie-dense, easy to prepare, and long-lasting food, designed to keep the body's internal fire burning in conditions where the external fire could go out at any moment. Sleepwear was critically important on the frontier, and its selection was based on the principles of layering, or the onion system. This method, known for centuries, allowed for the most efficient use of the heat generated by the body and prevented the penetration of cold. People did not sleep in pajamas, but in a carefully selected set that could be adjusted by removing or adding layers. The first layer was clean, dry underwear, often made of thin wool or flannel. This layer absorbed moisture, drew it away from the body, and helped keep the skin dry. A dry body loses heat much more slowly than a wet one, so the cleanliness and dryness of the first layer was the key to a good night's sleep. It was changed as often as possible. The second layer consisted of thicker clothing, thick shirts, vests, or sweaters. They created another air layer that acted as a thermos. The air trapped between the layers of fabric quickly heated up from the body and served as the best insulator. This principle of layering was the most reliable protection against the cold. Special attention was paid to the feet. Pioneers wore several pairs of socks, often made of different types of wool. The inner socks had to be thin, and the outer ones thick and coarse. Sometimes socks were insulated at night with dry hay or sheep's wool, which was placed between the layers to prevent the feet from freezing. A critically important element was the belt or wrap around the waist and abdomen. It was believed that retaining heat in this central part of the body was necessary to maintain the functioning of all vital organs. A wide woolen belt or wrap helped to retain heat, which was distributed throughout the body. The materials for winter clothing were almost exclusively natural. Wool, linen, and cotton allowed the skin to breathe without creating a greenhouse effect that led to rapid wetting and cooling. Synthetic materials were not used at that time, and natural wool was highly valued. The color of clothing was also important. Although it did not matter at night during the day, dark wool heated up faster in the sun, which was important for drying clothes after sleep. In the morning, the first thing to do was to hang clothes by the hearth to remove nighttime moisture and prepare them for the next use. Layering allowed you to regulate your temperature. If it got too hot, you could take off one layer, preventing overheating and subsequent sweating. If you woke up cold, you could cover yourself with a shawl or put on another vest without leaving your bed. It was important not to constrict the limbs with clothing. Tight boots or straps disrupted blood circulation, leading to rapid cooling of the fingers and toes. All clothing had to be loose so as not to interfere with blood flow or disrupt air pockets. Thus, sleepwear was as important a part of the survival system as the stove or mattress. A properly selected multi-layered set turned the body into an autonomous, well-insulated source of heat capable of withstanding the lowest temperatures. The onset of morning after a frosty night was not just the beginning of the day, but a carefully calibrated ritual that required caution and consistency. A sudden movement or an incorrect start to the day could lead to injury or rapid hypothermia. Everything was done slowly to avoid stress on the body, weakened by the night cold. The first to wake up and get up was the strongest and most resilient member of the family, usually the father. His task was to light the fire in the stove as quickly as possible, using the remaining embers, or if the fire had gone out, to strike a new spark. This had to be done before the rest of the family got up. While the fire was burning, the rest stayed in bed, conserving the accumulated heat. As soon as the stove started working and the smoke went up the chimney, the strongest member of the family prepared a hot drink, usually warm water or herbal tea. The hot liquid helped raise the body's internal temperature before getting out from under the blankets, starting the internal heating process. Only after the first warmth began to be felt in the room and the hot drink had been drunk did the rest begin to get up. They dressed quickly but without fuss, trying not to let the accumulated heat escape from under the blankets. They immediately put on their warmest clothes to prevent a sharp change in temperature and avoid getting sick. The morning ritual included drying everything that could get wet during the night. Clothes, socks, hats, and even some blankets were hung around the stove. Humidity in the house was one of the main enemies of warmth, so removing it was a priority. Drying was extremely important for maintaining health. This was followed by a hot, high-calorie meal. Hot porridge or meat stew, rich in fats, gave the body the energy it needed to start working. It was like starting a complex mechanism, first warming up, then refueling with fuel that would burn all day. The morning was also a time to inspect the house for new cracks and crevices. Overnight, the frost could cause the logs to shrink, and new paths for cold to penetrate could appear in the walls. These defects were immediately repaired to prepare the house for the next night without delaying repairs. The door was opened carefully and only for a short time to let out as little heat as possible. All work that required going outside was done as quickly as possible. Every degree of heat accumulated during the night was precious and guarded by the whole family. This strict morning routine allowed the pioneers not only to survive, but also to conserve their strength for work. Without it, they risked losing precious heat, weakening, and ultimately losing the battle against the merciless winter. We have examined in detail how survival at -40 degrees in the Wild West was not a matter of luck, but the result of strict discipline, a deep knowledge of nature, and unprecedented ingenuity. From the night stove in bed to the intricacies of managing the night fire, every element of pioneer life was part of a complex, vital system. They turned the very threat of cold into an opportunity using collective warmth, the insulating properties of the earth, and their body's ability to conserve energy as efficiently as possible. Their secret was that they didn't fight the cold head-on, but simply didn't give it a chance to penetrate the very heart of their homes and their bodies. These stories of winter survival on the frontier are not just historical facts. They are lessons in how the human spirit and ingenuity can overcome the harshest conditions. The pioneers proved that even with minimal resources, it is possible to build a bastion against the elements if you know how to use what nature gives you. They survived thanks to their discipline, meticulousness, and willingness to adapt, which made them true heroes of their time. Which of these survival tactics do you think is most effective in extreme cold? Was it the method of huddling in bed, or the unique system of laying night logs in the stove? Share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories about survival and the exploration of the American frontier.